This video discusses the real murder of Taylor Behl, a 17-year-old college freshman who disappeared in Virginia in 2005. It is presented for documentary, educational, and commentary purposes. Some details in this case were disputed, and Benjamin Fawley entered an Alford plea rather than given a full, traditional confession. That means he did not formally admit guilt in the way many people expect, but he accepted that prosecutors had enough evidence to convict him. This story is not intended to sensationalize Taylor's death. It is about the investigation, the early internet, and the digital traces left behind when a young life was taken. In 2005, the internet still felt like a bedroom with the door half open. It was personal, chaotic, colorful, and strangely innocent. People left pieces of themselves everywhere: song lyrics, diary entries, profile pictures, inside jokes, comments from friends, little fragments of a life that no one imagined might one day become evidence. This was the age of MySpace, LiveJournal, custom backgrounds, glitter graphics, song lyrics in profile bios, and online journals written like whispered confessions. It was not yet the polished world of perfect feeds and careful branding. It was messier than that, more exposed, more human. And somewhere inside that world was Taylor Behl, a 17-year-old freshman at Virginia Commonwealth University, starting the chapter that was supposed to become the beginning of her adult life. She had just arrived in Richmond, Virginia. She was away from home, meeting people, finding her place, and stepping into the freedom of college life. But within weeks of moving on to campus, Taylor vanished. One moment, she was a young woman at the beginning of everything. The next, she became a missing person. Her family searched, her friends worried. Police began piecing together her final movements, and slowly, attention turned toward the strange digital trail she had left behind. At first, it looked like the kind of online footprint millions of teenagers had in the mid-2000s. A MySpace page, a LiveJournal, comments, photos, connections, names that appeared again and again. But after Taylor disappeared, those ordinary digital fragments began to feel different. They no longer looked like teenage expression. They looked like clues. Taylor Marie Behl was from Vienna, Virginia. She was described by people who knew her as creative, intelligent, energetic, and full of possibility. She had recently graduated high school and moved to Richmond to attend VCU. For her family, this was supposed to be a proud moment. Their daughter was beginning college. She was stepping into independence. But independence can be complicated, especially at 17. Taylor was still young. She was still learning who to trust, how much of herself to share, and how to move through a world that suddenly felt bigger than it had before. College can feel exciting, but it can also make someone vulnerable. New city, new people, new routines. On September 5th, 2005, Taylor disappeared from the VCU area. It was Labor Day. By then, she had only been at college for a short time. When she did not return, concern quickly grew. This was not a simple case of someone ignoring calls or staying out late. Something felt wrong. Her mother, Janet, knew her daughter. She knew Taylor had dreams, plans, relationships, and a future she was moving toward. When Taylor vanished, that future suddenly seemed to freeze. The normal details of a teenager's life became urgent. Who had she spoken to? Where had she gone? Who had seen her last? In missing person cases, the first hours matter. But Taylor's disappearance unfolded in a world where investigators were still learning how much of a person's life could exist online. Today, police routinely look at phones, messages, social media accounts, location data, and digital records. In 2005, that kind of investigation was still becoming normal. Taylor's online life mattered because it showed relationships, conversations, emotional context, and possible connections. Reports from the time said police used her online writings to better understand her life and the people around her. Her LiveJournal was not just an online diary anymore. It had become part of the search for answers. Then there was MySpace. To younger viewers, MySpace might sound almost ancient now, like a forgotten ruin of the internet. But in 2005, it was massive. It was where people displayed identity, who they loved, what music they listened to, who their friends were, what mood they wanted the world to see. A MySpace page could be messy, emotional, and deeply revealing. It could show friendships, obsessions, arguments, private jokes made public. People left comments without thinking those words might someday be read by police, journalists, strangers, and grieving families trying to understand what happened. In Taylor's case, one name became increasingly important: Benjamin Fawley. He was much older than Taylor. He was an amateur photographer connected to the VCU area. Reports described him as someone who had taken and posted photographs of Taylor online. He was one of the last people linked to her before she disappeared. The age difference alone was unsettling. Taylor was 17. Fawley was 38. That gap matters. It changes the power dynamic. It changes how we look at attention, influence, and control. To a teenager newly entering college life, an older person with confidence, stories, cameras, and access to a creative scene could seem intriguing. But intrigue is not the same as safety. As the investigation developed, police looked closer at Fawley. His online presence, his photographs, his connection to Taylor, and his timeline all became important. Reports later described him as someone whose digital footprint helped investigators understand his link to Taylor and eventually push the case forward. For days, there was uncertainty. Taylor was still missing. Her family and friends were trapped in the brutal space between hope and fear. That space is one of the cruelest parts of a missing person case. Every phone call can feel like a possibility. Every silence can feel like a warning. Then, Taylor's car was found. It was discovered not far from the VCU campus, about 1.5 miles away. In many cases, a found vehicle becomes a turning point. It can suggest movement, staging, panic, or abandonment. But it does not always answer the biggest question. Where is the person who was supposed to be inside it? Investigators followed different leads. People were questioned. Some were cleared. The case did not move in a straight line. It rarely does. True crime can look simple after the ending is known, but in real time, investigators often face confusion, false starts, pressure, rumors, and incomplete information. As police continued working, they focused more heavily on Benjamin Fawley. According to reporting, a surveillance video showed Taylor and Fawley leaving her dormitory together on the night she disappeared. That detail mattered because it placed him close to Taylor at a critical point in the timeline. But the case still needed proof. Suspicion is not enough. A strange relationship is not enough. Online traces are not enough on their own. Investigators needed something that could move them from concern to evidence. Something that could show where Taylor had gone after she left campus. That is where the internet became more than atmosphere. According to CBS News, police were led toward the area where Taylor's remains were found after examining photographs connected to Fawley online. It was not glitter graphics or hidden playlist code. It was something colder and more practical. Images, locations, recognition, digital material becoming a map. One of the most disturbing things about the early internet is how casual it felt. People posted photographs constantly, often without thinking about what they revealed. Backgrounds, landmarks, houses, roads, rooms, places that meant nothing to strangers but everything to someone who recognized them. In Taylor's case, those online images helped investigators look beyond the city. The search moved toward Matthews County, Virginia, a rural area far from the VCU campus. What had started as a missing student case in Richmond was becoming something darker, stretching out into quiet land and hidden spaces. On October 5, 2005, about a month after Taylor vanished, her remains were found in a rural area of Matthews County. The hope that she might still come home ended there. For her family, the search changed into grief. For investigators, the case changed into a homicide investigation. There are moments in true crime where language becomes too small for the reality it is trying to describe. Remains were found is accurate, but it cannot hold what a family feels when the person they love is no longer missing, but gone. It cannot hold the collapse of hope. It cannot hold the weight of a life stopped at 17. After Taylor was found, the case against Fawley continued to build. He had already been arrested on unrelated child pornography charges after police searched his apartment and computers. The material investigators found there intensified concerns about him and raised further questions about his behavior, his relationships, and his access to young women. Fawley later gave an explanation for Taylor's death. He claimed it was accidental. He said she died during a consensual sexual encounter and that he panicked afterward. But prosecutors did not accept the idea that this was simply a tragic accident. Taylor's mother also publicly rejected his version of events. This is one of the reasons the case still feels disturbing, even though it is legally solved. There was no clean confession that gave everyone a complete, uncontested truth. There was an explanation from Fawley. There was rejection of that explanation from Taylor's family and prosecutors. And there was a legal outcome that closed the case without giving every answer. In August 2006, Benjamin Fawley entered an Alford plea to second-degree murder. An Alford plea is unusual to many people because it sits in a difficult space. The defendant does not fully admit guilt, but accepts that the evidence is strong enough that a conviction is likely. Fawley was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Legally, that meant the case was solved. The court had an outcome. The man connected to Taylor's final night had been convicted. But emotionally, the ending was more complicated. Because for Taylor's family, a sentence could not restore what had been taken. And then there was the internet. After Taylor's death, her online presence remained. Her MySpace profile was reportedly still active a year after her murder, with people continuing to leave comments. Her LiveJournal writings were also still accessible. The same digital spaces that once held her thoughts and friendships became a public memorial. That is what makes this case feel so tied to its time. Taylor did not just leave behind belongings, photographs, and memories. She left behind pages, profiles, entries, comments, a version of herself suspended in the early internet, still visible after she was gone. Before social media became permanent and polished, people treated it like a temporary bedroom wall. They decorated it, wrote on it, changed it, and assumed it belonged to the moment. But Taylor's case showed something different. The internet does not always let the moment disappear. Sometimes it preserves it. There is something deeply haunting about a profile outliving its owner. A birthday updating while the person does not age. Friends leaving messages that will never be answered. Strangers reading old words with the knowledge of what came next. A page that once meant self-expression becoming evidence, memory, and grief. But we have to be careful with that haunting feeling. Taylor was not a myth. She was not just a digital ghost or a creepy internet story. She was a real 17-year-old girl with a family, friends, plans, and a future. The internet angle is important, but it should never swallow the person at the center of the case. What happened to Taylor Behl is a warning about many things at once. It is a warning about older predators moving through youth spaces. It is a warning about the false safety of familiarity. It is a warning about how charm, attention, and creativity can be used to blur danger. It is also a warning about the internet itself. Not because the internet is automatically dangerous, but because it can make strangers feel close before trust has been earned. It can turn attention into intimacy. It can make someone seem known because you have seen their photos, read their words, or watched them perform a version of themselves online. In 2005, that lesson was still new. Parents, schools, police, and teenagers were all trying to understand what social networking meant. MySpace was not just a website. It was a new kind of social room, and like every room, it had doors. Some were open wider than people realized. Taylor's case became one of the early examples of how online life could matter in a criminal investigation. The clues were not just in streets, dorm rooms, and witness statements. They were also in profiles, photographs, journals, and digital connections. The old internet had left a trail, but the trail did not make the story less tragic. It made it more modern, more unsettling, because it showed that even when someone disappears from the physical world, parts of them can remain online, unchanged, waiting to be found by people who already know the ending. That is why Taylor Behl's story still lingers, not only because she was young, not only because the man convicted in her death was so much older, not only because the case ended with an Alford plea, but because her life and death became tied to a moment when the internet was becoming part of real-world crime. A MySpace page was never supposed to become a memorial. A LiveJournal was never supposed to become investigative material. A photograph online was never supposed to help lead police toward a body. But in Taylor's case, the ordinary pieces of a teenage digital life became part of something much darker. The case was solved in court. Benjamin Fawley was sentenced, but the unanswered emotional questions remain. What exactly happened that night? How much danger did Taylor sense? Could someone have stepped in sooner? And how many warning signs only became clear after it was too late? Those are the questions that stay behind after the headlines fade. They are the questions families live with. They are the questions true crime should handle carefully. Because behind every case file is a person who deserved more than becoming a lesson. Taylor Behl should have turned 18, then 19, then 20. She should have had the chance to become whoever she was going to become. Instead, her name became attached to one of the early internet-era murder cases that showed how digital life could follow someone into death. And somewhere in the archive of the old web, the shape of that time still exists. The glitter pages, the journal entries, the comments, the photos, the strange innocence of a social media world that did not yet understand how permanent it was becoming. Taylor's story is not about a website solving a murder by itself. It is about a young woman whose online life became part of the search for truth. It is about how the internet can preserve evidence, memory, and grief all at once. And it is about the terrible reality that sometimes the last traces of a person are not found in a diary under a bed, but on a profile page that never got to say goodbye. In the end, the most chilling part is not that Taylor left a digital trail. It is that she left one because she was alive in the same way so many teenagers were alive in 2005. Open, curious, creative, connected, trust in the world more than the world deserved. And when she vanished, that world did not vanish with her. It stayed online, waiting, comment by comment, photo by photo, page by page. A reminder that the early internet was never just pixels and profiles. Sometimes it was the place where the truth was hiding in plain sight.